The Gemara says that this world, as we know it, will exist for 6,000 years. The 6,000 years correspond to the 6 days of creation. We are currently in the year 5,771. So, not much time left. But the Gemara says that these 6,000 years are divided into 3/3. The first 2,000 years are tohu. The second 2,000 years are the years of Torah. And the final 2,000 years are the years of Yemos HaMashiach, the Messianic age. The Gemara says, because of our sins, some of that already has passed. Now, when the Gemara was written, approximately 1,500 years ago, so only about 250 years of it had passed. By now, a lot more of it has passed. We're already in the year 5,771. And the coming of Mashiach has been delayed. But in theory, it should have happened, could have happened, at the year 4,000. But beyond that point, his coming was delayed because of our sins. But this is the scheme. The first 2,000 years are Tohu, the second 2,000 years are Torah, and the final 2,000 years are the years of the Messianic age. What does it mean, Tohu? Of course, this is a biblical word. In last week's parasha, when God created the world, it says, "Ve'ha'aretz ha'isa tohu vavohu." The world was in a state of tohu. So what does tohu mean? Rashi understands it to mean empty. It was empty. And accordingly, Rashi on that Gemara learns that those first 2,000 years were empty of Torah. The world was in a state of emptiness. It lacked Torah. So therefore it's called tohu. It's an empty state. But that's not the only interpretation of tohu. The Ramban has a different understanding of the meaning of tohu. The Ramban holds that the word tohu means unformed. Unformed. So anybody that knows a little bit about Aristotelian metaphysics knows that everything that exists is really a composite of two aspects. There is substance and there is form. Substance is the material out of which the thing is made. The form are the set of characteristics that make a thing what it is, more than just the shape. So, for example, this table, the material it's made of is some type of wood and laminate, metal legs. These are the materials out of which the table is made. But it has certain characteristics that make it a table. It's a horizontal surface, stands on legs. That is the form of being a table. The Ramban says that when God created the world, he created the primordial substance out of which everything ultimately was made, but it was unformed initially. Over the course of the 6 days, it became formed. So tohu means unformed. God created the substance, the matter of the universe, and yet he did not impress upon that matter characteristics that give form to it. That's the meaning of tohu. It's unformed. So in that sense, if we say that the first 2,000 years are years of tohu, it means these are years which are unformed. Meaning, I think this is what it means, that there's some basic characteristics of the world and the way in which it works, which were not set up from the very beginning. That over the course of these 2,000 years, certain characteristics of the world, the nature of the world, became fixed. They developed over this time. By the end of the 2,000 years, it was firmly established. But during this period, the world was still, in a sense, unformed. Not everything had been realized yet. in terms of the essential structure and nature of existence. And I have to explore a little bit about that tonight. What really is the process of development? It's interesting to know, by the way, that the history of those first 2,000 years really is covered in the two parshias of Breitowitz and NOACH. Lech Lecha already begins the 2,000 years of Torah. Because the Gemara points out that really the Torah was not given at the year 2000. The Torah was given in the year 2448. So the question is, why does 2000 of Torah start at the year 2000? So the Gemara says there was a very, very important event which occurred in the year 2000, which is, this is when Avraham Avinu began to preach monotheism to the world. Now, Avraham Avinu was born in the Jewish year 1948, which is one of those amazing coincidences, which can't just be a coincidence. But he was born in the year 1948. And the Gemara says we have a tradition that he began his ministry to the world when he was 52 years old, which is exactly the year 2000. So this is when Torah began. Of course, the revelation on Har Sinai took place much later. But this is the beginning of Torah coming to the world, when Avraham Avinu begins to preach the truth to mankind. And that was at the year 2000. And that, of course, is in the beginning of Parshas Lech Lecha. Parshas Lech Lecha, the Torah makes reference to the Nefesh Asher Asu B'Charan, to the souls that Avraham had converted in his birthplace of Charan. And that process began when he was 52 years old. The story then jumps ahead to Avraham being 75 years old when he received his call to pick himself up and move to Eretz Yisrael. But there we have a reference to the beginning of his ministry, which was when he was 52 at the year 2000. So really the entire history of the first 2,000 years, the years of Tohu, is covered in the parsha of Breitowitz and the parsha of NOACH. So this is what we have to explore. Let's put that all in the back burner a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about NOACH. There is something that we discover in the life of NOACH, which I think we take for granted. We assume it's pashut, we assume that it's obviously true. But in a sense, NOACH seems to be the first person who has this experience, which is the experience of development over the course of his lifetime. When we take this for granted, that people learn, people grow, people develop, people change, is that so self-evident? Is that so axiomatic that it is possible for people to develop, grow, and change? Perhaps it's not that way. Perhaps you are what you are. You're born a certain way with certain characteristics, certain midos, certain personality traits, certain attitudes. And perhaps that's how a person remains over the course of his entire life. Obviously, he'll do mitzvahs, he'll do averos, he'll do good things, he'll do bad things, but in terms of fundamental change, is it so pashut, is it so obvious that people can change over the course of their lifetime? In the case of NOACH, Chazal tell us that the year that he spent on the Teva was a formative experience. It was a formative experience. And the Medrash points this out regarding a very interesting word which the Torah uses in discussing the construction of the Teva. It says, Kinem ta'ases ha-Teva, that the Teva should be built with compartments, with rooms. So it wasn't just one big open space. All the animals shared. Rather, each species had its own compartment. Kinem ta'ases ha-Teva. Now, Kinem also is a word which is used for pairs of birds. And the Torah, in certain instances, requires people, as part of a process of purification, to bring korbanos, sacrifices of pairs of birds. One will be a sin offering, one will be a burnt offering, and this is how various people who were defiled become purified and are allowed to now partake of sacrifices enter the temple. So the Medrash says that just like kinim, just like these pairs of birds purify the person who brings them, so the teva purified Noach. The experience of living in the teva purified Noach. So there's a development, there's some purification, some improvement which takes place over the course of this year. And we once suggested the possibility that what really happened was this. As we know that the crime or the sin for which the Mabul came, for which the flood came, was the sin of Chamas. Chamas is violent theft. What is the root? What is the shirish? What is the root of this sin? A certain self-centeredness. I am number one. I am the object of my own ultimate concern. You are furniture. You are just there. You are the setting in which I operate. But I am most important. I am of supreme importance. Everything revolves around me. And therefore, if that very good-looking car which you have will look nicer in my driveway, so I'll take it away from you. Or if that money which is sitting in your bank account will fill a hole in mine, I will take that from you. Because your feelings and your desires and your property is just not important. I am the only thing that really counts. That is the shirish of Chamas. The shirish, the root of Chamas, the violent theft, is a certain self-centeredness. We offered the conjecture that why was this such a rampant sin? So we pointed out a very interesting Ramban. There's a Ramban who asks a very interesting question. As we know that death is a universal experience. Everyone dies. No one lives forever. And we would think, therefore, that we should be very comfortable thinking about death, speaking about death. And we find that it's very important. No one likes to speak or think of his own mortality. If a person was to say, when I die, people say, oh, don't talk like that. Don't even say it. Don't even say it. We're not going to die. Everyone's going to die. Don't say it. Don't say those words. Because why do we find discussions of death so uncomfortable? The Ramban says an amazing thing. The Ramban says that Adam Harishon, Adam, was really meant to be immortal. He would have lived forever. Death was a consequence of the sin of eating the fruit of the Eitz Hadas. So therefore, Adam Harishon, who was created to be immortal, retained, as part of his psychological baggage, a sense of his own immortality. And therefore, even to think of the possibility of death is disturbing, because it goes counter to that very natural feeling of immortality. This is what Ramban says. Taking it a step further, when Adam Harishon was created, he was, I guess, Adam with his wife, were the masters of the entire world. If they were to say, B'shvili nivra ha'olam, for me the world was created, there would have been a certain truth to that. It really was created for them. They were the stewards, the owners of the entire world. And even as the population grew, as they had children and grandchildren and descendants, and the population increased, there still was, again, this retention of the psychological baggage that this is my world, all mine. And of course, when that translates itself into an agenda for action, it becomes chamas, it becomes violent theft. If the world really is all mine, then you're a squatter in my world. So I have the right to take it back from you. It's my entitlement. So this is why chamas is a problem which is natural to the human condition. How is the problem of chamas addressed? Chamas is addressed by a person devoting himself to the imperative of chesed. When you devote your life to service of others, nurturing, caring for others, so you uproot from your psyche this self-centeredness which leads to chamas, you become a different person. That was the experience of the Teva. For that year in the Teva, Noach was called upon to serve the animals, to tend to them, to care for them. And it was with great sacrifice that he did that. We all know the famous medrash on the verse which says, "Vayisho'er ach Noach," that Noach alone survived. So the medrash takes that to mean he barely survived, because one day he was late serving the lion its meal, and the lion took a bite out of Noach. How dare you come late with my supper? Just as an aside, you might ask the question that the lion couldn't be a little more patient. So Rabbi Breitowitz used to say that the lion had a very good argument. The lion said, "I'm the last lion. If you are late with my dinner, you're putting the entire species at risk. So how dare you come late with my dinner?" But this was the idea that Noach, for the entire year, was a zookeeper. He devoted himself to nurturing and tending to the animals. This uprooted from him this tendency to chamas. Now this, by the way, is something that we all know in our experience. As you meet a person who seems to be very, very self-centered, very selfish, and somehow the person gets married. You wonder who would have married such a person, but sometimes it happens. And then in the process of having children or raising children, the person is transformed. Instead of being a selfish, self-centered person, the person becomes a person who is responsible and caring, because now you have little people who become dependent upon you. And in that sense, fatherhood, motherhood can be a transforming experience. I think more for fathers than for mothers. I think for mothers it comes a little more naturally. For fathers, not as much. But this is the idea of Noach. This was a process of development. I want to point out that there is a machlokas Rishonim, there is a dispute in the Rishonim on this point, but at least the way Rashi understands, there was no inevitability that Noach would survive the Mabul. This is an amazing, amazing machlekes Rishonim between Rashi and the Ramban, how to learn Pshat in the entire parsha. It says that when God gave Noach the command to go into the Teva, so Hashem told Noach that V'gam Hakimosi is Brisha, I will establish a covenant with you. I will establish a covenant with you. And you will enter the Teva, and so on and so forth. And what is the covenant? So the Ramban says the covenant is that you will come out of the Teva alive. That after the Mabul is over, you will come out of the Teva alive. That's the covenant. That's the promise that God makes. And it's an amazing thing that you look in the entire parsha, God never tells Noach explicitly that he's going to survive this experience. It's an amazing thing. It's implicit. You think it's implicit. But it never says initially that you're going to go into the Teva and you're going to come out of it. God says they're going to bring the Mabul and you're going to go into the Teva. It doesn't say he's going to come out. But the Ramban understands this is the covenant, this is the bris. This is the promise that God makes that you'll survive the Mabul. Rashi, by contrast, says an amazing thing. That what is this covenant? The covenant is that the food won't rat over the 12 months in the Teva. That's what Rashi says. So by contrast, it's an amazing thing. I mean, the Ramban's pshat is so simple, so obvious. Why does Rashi have to stick his neck out and understand that the covenant is that the food won't rat? Because Rashi understands God made no promises to Noach that he'll survive. You'll go into the teva, and then we'll see. If you pass the test, if you are worthy of being saved, you'll be saved. If not, then you'll die in the teva. So the only promise, according to Rashi, that God made was that the food won't spoil. You'll have what to eat. You won't starve to death. Whether you'll come out alive, no promises. The Ramban holds there was a promise. Now, later in the Chumash, we have the same machlokas again. It says that at the end of the flood, it says, Vayiskar Elokim es Noach. God remembered Noach. So what does it mean God remembered Noach? So the Ramban says exactly what you would expect. He remembered that he had made a covenant with Noach, that Noach would survive the Mabul, and now God is going to keep his word. And Rashi again says something which is totally astounding. It says, what does it mean, Vayiskar Elokim es Noach? It means God took note of the great merit of Noach during the months in the Teva, that Noach prayed. And we know that Tfilas Tzadikim, the prayers of the righteous, have the power to turn the Midas Hadin, the attribute of divine justice, into Midas Harachman, into divine mercy. And by the way, the Medrash says, what was the prayer of Noach during the 12 months? So the Medrash brings the Pasuk in Tehillim, Hotzia mimazger nafshi v'hodos l'shemecha, which David HaMelech said in Tehillim, but according to the Medrash, Noach said it first, release my soul from its imprisonment in order that I can praise your name. That was the prayer of Noach, and that's what God remembered. God remembered the fact that Noach prayed during the 12 months he was in the Teva. God took note of that, and that's why God let Noach happen. Meaning that had Noach not prayed, he wouldn't have come out. In other words, again, Rashi holds there was no inevitability to Noach being saved. God said, listen, everyone else is being wiped out, you aren't going to give you a chance. Build a teva and enter the teva. You ever come out of the teva, then we'll see. That depends. Depends how you behave. Depends what you do. But the Ramban holds that no, it was understood from the outset that Noach would be saved. At least according to Rashi, we see that this period of the teva is not it's not a given that Noach will survive. It's really a nisayon, it's a test of sorts. Noach passed the test, and therefore he was spared.
We don't have a sense, we have a lot of sense of what went on in the Teva in terms of Noach's responsibilities to the animals. We don't have a sense of him navigating the Teva at all. You just get a sense it's floating wildly on the waves.
That's correct. He wasn't steering the Teva in any specific direction.
Right.
Yes. But this is the point. The point is that there was no inevitability to his surviving. It really was a test. That's the idea of kinim tasas a Teva. Just like the birds purify the person who brings them, the Teva purified Noach. Meaning there was a process of development which took place there, which might have gone in a different direction. Yes.
I was troubled about the sons of Noah, because I know that they went in on his merit, but they weren't. 2 of the 3 were not good, and generations of terrible things came from that. Did they earn their survival on the earth?
I understand it this way. I understand that the sons of Noach didn't necessarily have the merit to survive. The world was given a chance to start anew under the leadership of Noach. Now, if the people don't want to be led, that's a problem. But God's determination was that, and again, either this was initially or it came at the end of the 12 months, God determined that Noach was a leader who was a fitting leader to lead the world anew. Whether the people want to be led, then that remains to be seen. Now, yes?
Well, I have a question, but according to the way it says, we're descendants of Shem, the 10th of Shem, right? That's for the Jews.
Right.
And then you have his other 2 sons, like you just mentioned, that went bad. But if Noach is the leader, then he didn't have any more children. That I understand. And Shem is
that's right. That's right.
So God knew that. Obviously.
He's going to lead the children.
Always lead the children
that have already been born.
Yeah.
He'll be their guide, their mentor, their inspiration.
Yeah.
Again, whether they will follow or not. But this will become a little bit more clear after we continue. Now, what I really want to speak about is a very, very interesting thing. There's, if you go back to the end of Parshas Breitowitz, when God makes the determination that He's going to bring the flood, so He says like this. He says, Vayar Hashem, God saw ki rabba ras ha'adam ba'aretz, that the evil of man in the world was very great. V'chol yetzer machshavos libo rak ra kol hayom, and the product or the inclination of the thoughts of his heart are always evil. Meaning that everything man contemplates, schemes, plans, turns out to be evil, and therefore the situation is hopeless. So Vayinachem Hashem, that God be considered ki asa adam, having created man. Vayisatzei b'libo, he was very sad in his heart. And Vayomer Hashem, Hashem said, Emche asa adam asher barasei, I will wipe out the man that I created, from the face of the earth. So this fact that the Yetzer, the inclination of man's heart is evil, was really a rationale for the decision to destroy man. In Parshas Noach, when Noach comes out of the Teva, comes out of the ark, so the Torah tells us a story, and this story requires a lot of understanding. It says that Noach came out of the Teva, and it says he built an altar, and he took from all the kosher animals, and he brought sacrifices on the altar. And God smelled the pleasant fragrance, which of course is a metaphor for being pleased with the sacrifice. God said to his heart, and the Ramban says this means that this was not revealed to anybody until, of course, the Torah was written. But for the many hundreds of years until the Torah was written, this remained God's private thought. Lo osif lakalel es odes adam lavur ha'adam. I will not curse the earth again because of man. Ki yetzer leiv ha'adam ravin urov. Because the inclination of man's heart is evil from his very youth. I will not smite all living things as I have done. As long as the earth continues, the cycles of planting and harvesting and cold and hot and summer and winter, day and night, lo yishbos will not cease. So God responds to the sacrifice. We have to understand what was special about the sacrifice. Why was this? In response to the sacrifice, but he says, I will not bring another flood. I will not smite the earth again because of the sins of man. So we have to understand exactly what changed. Like before, God thought it was totally appropriate to smite the earth because of the sins of man. Now God says, no, he's not going to do it anymore. Why not? What really changed? And but more than that, it says the reason he's not going to do it is because the Yetzer, the inclination of man's heart, is evil from his very youth, which seems to mean that man is through and through evil from the very beginning, and therefore I'm not going to destroy the world because of man, which is like a blatant contradiction. Earlier, God said that is exactly the reason I will destroy the earth. I will destroy the earth because man's inclination is totally evil, and now he's saying because man's inclination is totally evil, that's why I'm not going to destroy the earth. That's a very, very perplexing thing. Now the key distinction between the two verses is that there's one little point which is added in this verse, which is that the inclination of man's heart is evil from his youth. From his youth. Urav, which is not written in the earlier verse. The earlier verse it says that the inclination of man's heart is ra, just evil. But here it makes the point that it's evil from his youth. Well, what does that mean? The person said like this. There's a famous Gemara in Sanhedrin that says, when does a person get the Yetzer Hara? When is the Yetzer Hara introduced into a person? So the Gemara says, from the moment of birth. As soon as you're born, you have the Yetzer Hara, evil urge. When do you get the Yetzer Tov? When you become Bar Mitzvah. So the Gemara says that's why the Yetzer Hara is called a Melech Zaken Uksil, an old, foolish king, because he's been around for a long time. And the Yetzer Tov is called Yeled Chacham Miskein. He's a wise child, because he's a newcomer. It only comes from the person who's Bar Mitzvah. But what does that mean? The Yetzer Hara has a 13-year advantage, and girls a 12-year advantage. What is the idea? It is like this. We're talking about the Yetzer Hara. What does the Yetzer Hara mean? What is the Yetzer Hara? The Yetzer Hara is not a little devil that sits on your shoulder and tells you do evil. Very few people get up in the morning and think, what evil can I do today? The Yetzer Hara really is nothing more, nothing less than the natural urges of a human being. The human being wants food, drink, pleasure, amusement, and so on and so forth. And the reason it's called the Yetzer Hara, because if one follows it without restraining it, without controlling it, it will inevitably lead to evil. That's what the Yetzer Hara is. The Yetzer Hara are the natural urges of a human being. It says, when do you have those natural urges? As soon as you're born. You're born with them. Right? The urge for food, right, doesn't come later in life. You acquire it when you're born. Your tastes may change. You know, the infant is satisfied with the mother's milk. You know, the adult wants a steak dinner. But the fundamental urge for food, for nourishment, is something you're born with. So therefore, the Yetzer Hara you're born with. What is the Yetzer Tov? The Yetzer Tov is rational judgment, the conscience of the person who analyzes the situation and makes a determination. This is the right thing to do, this is the wrong thing to do, and so on and so forth. When is the person considered a bar das? When is the person considered as having moral intelligence? That's when a person is Bar Mitzvah. Now obviously, some people will get it a little bit early, some people will be delayed. So the halacha obviously has to have a fixed time. In other words, it would be very awkward if we would subject a Bar Mitzvah boy to an exam, right, to determine if he has this moral intelligence. And it would be very strange. You have some kids that they'll be planning the Bar Mitzvah for a certain date, and then you tell them that your Bar Mitzvah is going to be 3 months early because you've acquired this earlier. Or some instances, the kid is planning for his Bar Mitzvah, and they tell him, says, no, you don't got it. I think we're going to wait another 3 months, and your Bar Mitzvah will be delayed. And so obviously, in terms of the halakha, there has to be a fixed measure. The fixed measure is 13 years old. And
so we don't view it as an effect of the Bar Mitzvah. We view it as a qualification for the Bar Mitzvah.
No, I think the essence of what it means to be a bar das is to have this moral intelligence. But a legal system has to have a fixed measure. So therefore the halacha was kaveya that this is 13 years old. Right? Whether this is a rabbinic assessment, whether this is halacha l'moshe Sinai is a shaila that the achronim discuss. But in theory, it's not a question of age, it's a question of moral intelligence. That's the Yetzer Tov. That certainly comes later. You're certainly not born with that. Okay? So this is what the Talmud says. The verse here says like this, that it's true that a man's natural impulse is to evil, but only from his youth. It's not something which is necessarily permanent. It's something that can change, something that can develop over time. Now, when we say it develops over time, it's not only that it develops over time within the lifetime of an individual, but it develops over time over the history of the human race. Because we learn from our mistakes as a society, not only as individuals. Right? That is essentially the advantage that human beings have over animals. Right? Animals cannot learn from the experience of other animals. But they may be able to learn from their own experiences. But there's no way they can learn from the experience of others, because that depends on communication. It has to be that one animal can communicate to the other what it has learned from experience, and therefore this second animal now can rely on the experience of the first. Animals, as far as we know, don't have the capacity for that type of communication. Right? We do it all the time.
Don't baby ducks and baby wolves learn from their mothers?
No, they don't learn from their mother. This is part of their instinct. This is part of their nature. In other words, something which is learned, right, that you experience, right, you can't, they don't have the mechanism for transmitting. In other words, for example, a duck may learn how to avoid the hunter, but how could it communicate to its child what a hunter looks like, or where the hunter is to be found, and so on and so forth? Right? It doesn't have the capacity to have a communication. Obviously, all species know how to do certain things, because that's part of its instinct. That's its natural makeup. But anything which the mother has to learn, it would have no way of imparting that to the child. Human beings have a way. That's what communication is all about.
Except through example.
I don't know even if through example they can do it. Yeah, that's something that can be explored. But human beings certainly have that capacity. So when we say that the Yetzer Hara is Menu'ura, evil is from our very youth, it means two things. It means that over the course of our own lifetimes, we can develop and grow and change, but it also means that as a species, as a race, over time we can learn from our mistakes and we can develop and we can change. And that's really what God is saying over here. He's saying that I'm not going to destroy the world for the sake of man, because while it's true that the inclination of man is to evil, but that is only because of his youth and immaturity. But he can develop, he can change. And therefore, I'm not going to destroy the world, meaning because the world was not created for man at present. It's created for what man has the potential to become. It isn't man's current actions which justify creation. It's man's potential for the future which justifies creation. Let's go back to the Mabul. Right? We all know the story that God determined that the human beings were evil, and therefore he wiped out the earth. Now, not only did he wipe out man, he also wiped out the animals, the plants. The entire earth was flooded. So, of course, Chazal asked the question that people sinned, okay, they're deserving of a punishment. What did the earth do wrong? What did the animals do wrong? What did the plants do wrong? So Rashi quotes the Medrash, which basically answers the following, that the entire world was created for the sake of man. So if man is corrupted, then everything loses its justification for existence. And the Medrash gives a muscle. There was once a man who made a wedding feast for his son. Very, very lavish feast. The tables are laden with food, and all the guests are coming, and the wedding is going to take place. Just minutes before the ceremony, the son dies. So the father is terribly shattered, distraught. He goes into the wedding hall, he overturns all the tables. He'll come to, hey, listen, we're very sorry that your son died, but there's good food. What are you ruining the whole feast? Sleep. So he said, the whole feast is only for the wedding. If there's no wedding, what do I need the feast for? So that's what God told us in the parsha of the Mabul, that the world was created for the sake of man. So if man is corrupted, then the world has no justification for existence, and therefore the world is destroyed. But doesn't that assume that the justification for the world is the conduct of man now? Because man's conduct now must justify creation. If man is corrupt now, then there's no need to have a world. But what if man can change? So it's true. Man, as he exists now, does not deserve to have a world. His actions don't justify the creation of a world. But his children, his descendants, his great-grandchildren, maybe even he himself can repent and change. So why destroy the world? Just because man is not deserving of it now? Yeah? Something good can still happen. That really is the change. In other words, in the beginning, back in the end of Parshas Breitowitz, what God is saying is that the existence of the world must be justified by man's conduct now. If man is worthy now of having a world, there'll be a world. If man now is not worthy of having a world, there won't be a world. So since at this moment the inclination of man's heart is only evil, so there's no point in the world. I'm going to wipe out man, and I'm going to wipe out the world as well. Later on, he says something else. He says that I'm not going to wipe out the world, because it's true that man's inclination is evil, but it's only evil because of his immaturity. It's Raman Urav. The potential exists for development, for change, for tshuva, for repentance, for striving, for aliyah, for ascent. And therefore it's true that right now he might not be deserving of a world. But that doesn't justify destroying the world. Because it's true, man as he is might not deserve a world, but the potential exists for his descendants, for his great-grandchildren, his great-great-grandchildren, 100 years, 100 generations down the road, or even he himself to develop, and that would justify creation. So this is really what changes. What changes is that God initially, and we'll have to see why this changes, God initially says that the question of whether a world should exist depends on the conduct of man in the present, in real time. Does man right now deserve to have a world? There'll be a world. If man right now does not deserve to have a world, there won't be a world. So since God makes a determination that right now the inclination of man is totally evil, that's it. No world. Wiping out the world, flood, no animals, no plants, no nothing, no human beings. There's a mountain. What changes is that God says that no. The fact that man is evil now doesn't mean that the world has no justification. It's Ram and Urav, right? It's bad because it's immature. It's immature. It needs to develop. But it can develop in such a way that would justify creation. And therefore I'm not going to destroy the world. What changed? What changed? I think that what really changed is that NOACH introduced something into the world, a latent potentiality, which, had it not been actualized by NOACH, would not have existed, which is the potential for change, for development, for growth. That did not exist until NOACH. So therefore, God initially looks at the world and says like this: look, we have a situation. The people are corrupt through and through. Is there going to be any change? Is there going to be any development? Is there going to be any growth? Is there any potential for tshuva? Doesn't look like it. It's okay, so you cut your losses. Yaakov Kamenetsky once said, in Yiddish, the Fabrik geht nicht, if the factory isn't running, with that verbrennen the Fabrik, you have to burn it down, you have no choice. There's no point in keeping it going. You burn it down, you start from scratch. Now, of course, burning it down was a favorite way of extracting some last financial benefit from a failing enterprise. But that's essentially what God determined at the time of the novel. In other words, because there really had not been, until that point, within humanity, the process of development, of change, of aliyah, of tikkun. Whereas people were what they were. They did good things, bad things, but the fundamental change, fundamental development, that hadn't existed. And therefore God says that if a man now doesn't deserve to have a world, the Bible is the next course. Noach introduced something to the world which was new, which is aliyah, which is tikkun, which is development, which is striving. As we said, the 12 months on the table was a process of development. The response to that God says, is that once Noach introduces this to the world, then we don't need that man's current actions should justify creation. The potential for man's future actions justify creation. In other words, since the Yetzer Leiv HaAdam is Ra min Urav, it's only evil because it's immature, it's undeveloped. But it can change. Therefore, there's no reason to destroy the world just because man at this moment is sinful. But it's not man's current actions which justify creation, it's the potential for man's future actions which justify creation. And Noach changed that by bringing something new into the world, which is the potential for a change and development. This is symbolized by the idea of the carbon. The carbon, which is symbolic, I think maybe the best way of putting it is this way. Societies express their deepest yearnings through their myths and through their rituals. In other words, the potentials which are as yet unrealized, but the yearnings for them are revealed through their mythology and through their rituals. The ritual of a carbon is the idea, is really, there are two aspects to it. The building of the mizbeach, the building of the altar, right, is elevating the earth towards God. Correct? In other words, you elevate the earth. Mm-hmm. So in the book of Yecheskel, the mizbeach is called Har El, it's called the mountain of God. You are elevating the earth towards God. And the idea of the animal, especially the carbonol, the burnt offering, is in a sense vicarious self-sacrifice. You are symbolically sacrificing yourself. Now it's a lot easier to sacrifice an animal than to sacrifice yourself. I understand that. But that's what the carbon is. The carbon is symbolic of a yearning for some type of development, some type of growth, some type of spiritual ascent. And hopefully the carbon won't remain a symbolic ritual, but hopefully it will become realized in the life and the behavior of the person. When the person comes to the base of English and he brings the carbon, in other words, hopefully he's not going to leave Yerushalayim unchanged. Once he's engaged in this ritual, but the hope is that the ritual will actually translate itself into a renewed commitment to spiritual growth and development. When Noach brings the carbon, which is symbolic of the she'ifah, the yearning for spiritual ascent, so HaKadosh Baruch Hu says, now I don't have to bring another malach. Because now I see that Noach has introduced into mankind the quality of yearning, of ascent, and therefore it's not man's current actions which justify creation, it's man's future potential which justifies creation, and therefore there won't be another malach. And this is really a fantastic thing. As I said, it's something that we take for granted. But of course, we take for granted because it's already something which is familiar. But this is something that the ancients didn't know necessarily. This, for example, because even though we have midrashim that seem to apply that Cain, for example, did tshuva, right? But the tshuva of Cain was a very meager tshuva. And it says that when Adam sends Cain, so Cain says, "Gadol Amonim," and so it says, "Is my sin so heavy you can't forgive it?" And he asked for forgiveness. So okay, so it sounds like he did tshuva. But what kind of tshuva was it? It says that Adam Harishon met Cain afterward, and Adam Harishon asked him, "Nusa, what happened?" So he said, "Asisi tshuva v'nespasharti." I did tshuva and I made a deal. We came to a compromise, a plea bargain. It wasn't, it wasn't the type of tshuva where there's fundamental change and yearning for spiritual ascent. But he confessed. Mostly he confessed to sin. Okay, so God, in His mercy will accept that too. But real development, real aliyah, you don't find that in the case of Cain. Right? That's Noach. Whereas Noach really is a person who really has developed and learned from his experiences. Again, not a perfect person, because we know that there are stories later on about Noach and the vineyard, which are tragic stories. But at this point, the idea of bringing the carbon, this carbon is filled with yearning, and it's filled with a desire for closeness to God. God says that as long as this potential exists in man, there's no need for another novel. And this is the reality. The reality is that the world we live in, I often wonder, is it any better than the world of Noach? The things you read in the papers, you wonder if take any day's newspaper. The things you read are so horrifying, so shocking. You wonder, these things could not have happened, even in Noach's time. Right?
God's vow is not to destroy it by water, or not to destroy it at all?
Not to destroy it at all. There's a famous Gemara. The Gemara says that Paro had this cheshbon. Paro said that if we want to deal with Moshe Rabbeinu, the best way is to drown him, because God swore He wouldn't bring a mouthful of water. But any other way, He'd get back at us, right? But the Marsha says there that it was a mistake. It was miscalculation on Paro's part. The reality is that the decree was it wouldn't be a mouthful at all. But the whole thing was a mistake, because He wouldn't bring a mouthful to destroy the entire world, but certainly to punish the individual sinner that God would do. So the whole thing is a miscalculation. But this is what I think that we should take out of this. So let me just close with a very interesting thing that Rav Tzadok HaKayin writes, an amazing thing, that the Gemara says that there are certain divrei Torah, certain ideas of Torah, she'ein adam oimed aleihem elim kenichsel hem. A person doesn't fully understand them until he's stumbled over them, until he's made a mistake. Because you don't get them right until you've gotten it wrong. It's just like they say that every successful businessman, right, has had a major failure in his past. And he couldn't have achieved his success had he not built that success on the foundation of a previous failure. So there are certain divrei Torah you can't get them right until you've gotten them wrong. I'll just tell you one hysterically funny story that illustrates this. There's a halacha that when a baby is born, so you do the bris on the 8th day, even if it's on Shabbos. But the halacha is that's only if it's a natural birth. If the baby's been born by cesarean, then you don't do the bris on the 8th day if it's Shabbos. I guess the theory is because maybe the baby wouldn't have been born that day, so we can't do it on Shabbos. So therefore, when a father calls up a moel and says, we're having a bris on Shabbos, so do the bris. So the first question that the moel has to ask always, was it a natural birth or was it a cesarean? If it was a cesarean, we'll do the bris on Shabbos, only if it was a natural birth. So I have a friend who was a starting moel. And this was in California, and he was invited to do a bris on Shabbos. And he said, "Glad we can do the bris on Shabbos." Now this bris was in a place there was no shul within an hour walk of the place, so he had to go away for Shabbos to another neighborhood. Leave his family and daven that shul, and even then he was going to have to walk an hour to go to do the bris. Anyway, it's Shabbos, and all of a sudden he realizes he never asked the person whether it was a cesarean or not. So okay, I'm not going to worry about it. When he gets there, he'll ask. Right? So he gets to the house. And he asked, by the way, was this like a natural birth or was it a cesarean? So I said it was a cesarean.
Another hour.
Can't do the bris on Shabbos. And if you do the bris on Shabbos, you're violating the Shabbos. In the meantime, all the guests have come, and everyone is there. And finally, there was one person at the bris who knew a little bit something, and said, understood the situation. So he said like this, he says, listen, he says, I will stand between you and the audience, right? And you'll just, do your thing and say some blessings. And no one will know the difference so you didn't do the bris. And tomorrow you'll come back and do the bris. And that's what he did. Anyway.
Really?
Yeah. He told me like this, that's the kind of mistake you make once in your life.
So you grew from that.
Yeah. After that, the rest of his life, he'll never make that mistake again. Not asking. No, the truth is, there are a lot of things like that. In other words, you always make a mistake until the first time you really get it wrong, you botch it up, and then you'll never make that mistake again. That's what it says. There are certain divrei Torah. Hamachshela zos tachas yodecha. Elu divrei Torah. A person cannot get them until he's stumbled, until he's made a mistake. But Tzaddik HaKayin says that really this is the theme of these two parashas, Bereshis and Noach, are the failures of mankind. The failure in the Garden of Eden, the failure of the Mabul, the later stories in the Parsha with the Tower of Babel, and so on and so forth. And these are the failures which we have to learn from. We learn as a species, as a race, from our misfortunes, from our bad experiences. And these are the mistakes we don't repeat. And it has to be that way. In other words, if God would have created the world in such a way that he would protect us from these mistakes, we never would have learned those lessons otherwise. These are not the kinds of lessons you can figure out logically. These are the types of lessons that you only learn from your mistakes. And that's really what these parashas are all about. These are the years of Tohu. These are the years of the world being unformed. There are things that we have to learn from bad experiences, from misfortunes, from errors. There are things that are introduced. Like, in accordance with our conjecture, NOACH introduces the possibility of genuine change, which in turn creates the potential for even a wicked generation not experiencing a marvel. Because it's not the current actions of man which justify creation, it's the potential for the future which justifies creation. Now these are things which are introduced by man. In other words, there are potentialities, of course, that God created in man, but had these potentialities never been realized, then the world would have taken a totally different direction. Right? That is what really means to be Tohu. Tohu means something which is unformed, it's unshaped. Right? We shape it. We shape it. NOACH created something new in the world that, that in a sense, makes it possible for us to continue. Even in a world which is very, very corrupt, because there's always hope for change and tshuva and development and aliyah and growth, as symbolized by the Karban. And of course, Avraham Avinu takes that a step further in the next week's parsha. But I think we have to give a little credit to NOACH. I think we tend to forget that he made a very, very major contribution before Avraham. Avraham was the first Jew, so we tend to think that everything starts from him. But I think that there's something which NOACH contributed that we can't dismiss. We have to give him the credit.